So welcome everybody to this session called New Novels About Family. So we have Jemimah Wei and Rochelle Potkar in conversation with Goa's own Shivranjana Rathore. Jemimah is the author of what anticipated The Original Daughter. She was raised in Singapore and now lives in New York in the US. And her first novel has got lots of rave reviews from many people and was many sort of bestseller charts around Singapore and in America and UK as well. She was teaching at Stanford University earlier, but now she's going into sort of full-time writing. She spent 3 years career in advertising and then 8 years on-screen presenting. Rochelle Potkar is an esteemed writer. She's 5 novels and collections of poetry, and they include the hauntingly beautiful Paper Asylum, Moving 4 Degrees of Separation, and her most recent book, published I think in 2024, was Coins in the River, which is now titled Coins in the River. I think we had a different title before. Beyond her own creations, she's got expertise as a mentor, and she's guiding younger, aspiring authors as well. And Shivranjana Rathore, she's an artist and writer based here in Goa, and she was co-editor of a book that was launched this morning called Appetites. Her sort of central themes are about existentialism, leading towards the absurd and surrealist, and she works across many different mediums, including comics, books, zines, and installations. And she'll be sort of in conversation with our 2 esteemed authors.
Thanks so much, Prashant. Thanks, everyone, for making time for this session. I am personally most excited to talk to 2 people that I've been in conversation with a lot over the last 2 days. As you know, they're both prolific writers, writing about some really interesting and in-depth stories around the family. And I think the family, essentially, is the first social unit. I think it's the playground for also the rest of the world for a lot of us. And when the chance to talk to the 2 of you for this panel came up, I lunged at it, literally, because I want to get into your heads and understand what was the process like for you all. And I think maybe we can start off talking a little bit about why the family. Why is it that the 2 of you wanted to talk about the family through your narratives, and what was the inspiration behind it? Would you want to start, maybe?
Sure. So, hi everyone, I'm Jemimah. Thanks so much for the introduction and for being in conversation with us. This is really exciting. It's my first time in Goa, my first time in India, and I've been having great conversations over the last couple of days while being insanely jet-lagged out of my mind. So if I, speak too fast or lose my train of thought, it's the jet lag and not a function of my personality. So I'll just kind of give a little bit of context around my novel, just so people aren't floating at lost. So I wrote this novel, The Original Daughter. It's published by Doubleday in the US and Vattenfall and Nicholson in the UK. And in India, it's distributed by Hachette, so you can find it online. And the novel took 9 years to write, and it's about 2 sisters, one who is adopted, growing up in a rapidly modernizing Singapore around the turn of the millennium. And they are trying really hard to jump a class, to move up the social order, and achieve fame and fortune, and they become violently estranged on their journey to achieving fame and fortune while they are navigating an extreme sense of trying to develop an independent self versus codependent self. They're navigating the difference between independence and intimacy, what it's like to be, to keep choosing your chosen family over and over and over again. And this really drew me in many years ago because through my childhood, I felt like the narratives of romance were really given primacy, in the hierarchy of relationships. And I felt like that was just not really authentic to the experience of being a young woman growing up in the world. For me, I felt like your most intimate formative relationships were, non-romantic ones, at least at the age of 5, right? So it was with other women, it was other girls, it was with teachers, mentors, parents, things like that. And so I told myself I wanted to write this novel that would be a love story, but the most unromantic love story ever. And I felt like the family, we spoke about this yesterday, but the family is the basic social unit. And you recreate like your structures of whatever society the family is placed in within the confines of that family unit. And so then the family then becomes like this petri dish where those dynamics of society are reproduced and pressured. And I find that to be pretty fascinating. So that it just felt extremely natural to set it in this kind of like social unit. But also, like growing up, those were the stories that I enjoyed the most. I enjoyed stories of like people, families, and moving through changing times. I love reading books where I felt like I could really follow a life changing over the course of many years, or like a family moving through a country that's moving very quickly. And it sounds like now 9 years later, it feels like, oh, there's like this coherent like journey from conception of an idea of a novel to like published product. But in reality, much of the first 5 years, you're just splashing around the woods, like, trying to figure out like which direction you're going in, and then it really comes together towards the ending. So you gain a bit of momentum as you're writing, and it feels like you're lost for a long time, and then suddenly it's like there's this rush, and you're like, oh wow, it's like the last 10%, it's like rocket ship. So that was at least my experience of like creating this novel, and I'll be really curious to hear. I'm so impressed that you have 5 books. I was just wondering like if you had a similar experience. Some of your poetry, but also, I wonder if you could provide some insight into what the future holds. Book 2, 3, 4, 5.
It's so interesting to hear that about like the sisters. You chose, sisterly relationship to take it to the...
Yeah, well, I mean, they're sisters, but they're sisters by kind of like choice, right? Because the ideas are one. So basically, the novel starts in 1996, and this girl, Genevieve, she's 8 years old when her grandmother says, okay, your grandfather, who I have told you was dead this whole time, actually was alive, and he was living in Malaysia, hiding out with his other family. So this like giant family secret, it's like a scandal where he basically like abandoned them, but the grandmother couldn't deal with that reality, so she just told her family that he's dead. But no, he's only dead like yesterday, and there's this like that family has too many kids, and so now we're going to adopt this daughter from the other family. So it's almost like she had this instant sister. And so then the question that really came to mind for me was like, what does it mean to keep choosing the people that you love over and over and over again? Like, what are the limits of love, and what can love really like endure? How does love change under differing circumstances? And so yeah, it is like a sister story, but it's also like a sister adjacent kind of story, I feel like. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm waiting to read it. So you asked me why family, right? Yeah. So I think we at least have one family story inside us, if not many. I think sometimes you could write books and books on family relationships, because that's the first orbit, right, of what you become, how you shape up. And so I had this very large Goan Catholic family, which was very nutty and crazy, growing up in Kalyan, and which is a satellite town to Bombay. And only when I moved to Bombay did I telescope this small town, because the small town was like a microcosm. There was one thing, it was one thing of everything. There was one library, there was one or two schools. It was a microcosm, but this microcosm teaches you the macrocosm, because you can figure out the microcosm. It's like a bit of a model or a sample. This large family was rife with all nutty and crazy characters as I grew up. And of course, there might be layers of human dynamics, like my mother not being very comfortable with her mother-in-law, those kinds of things. But we enjoyed so much as a family, like a crazy family, coming from Kalyan to Goa, going to Bombay, were very essential rituals, annual rituals. So this large family, when I became a writer or a poet, one of the things was to gossip about them, because they had so much of material that you want. And because when you have overripe observations, you tend to move between characterizing and caricaturing. So it's somewhere here, this DaCosta family became this black comedy because it was somewhere between the two. And I think the first time I did it was in my poem Gathering, which is, I just realized today that it's also part of the Chaugule College syllabus. But Gathering was the first poem wherein I really bitched about my family, changing all the names. Yeah, so no one would know who's who. And I had a lot of fun, and that was the biggest icebreaker wherever I went, because everyone loves to know the bad things happening in someone else's family. Because they can then just write their little notes and say, you know what, that's my family. That's my family. That kind. So it started with gathering, but it didn't stop there, because there was a lot of, as they say in Mumbai slang, the kida. There was a lot of kida, or a lot of itch. And so this book had to come out. Now, family is one thing, but what I needed to, grapple with in this, this story was with me since my birth, right? Because this is the biggest story, or the deepest story that's there inside you. Everything else comes from observation, experience, but in adolescence and adulthood. But nothing as genesis as this. At the same time, the story was not willing to come out as a literary fiction, multi-generational story of a mother-in-law and 3 daughter-in-laws, one being my mother. I was trying to grapple and battle and wrestle with it, if you believe you can wrestle with a story as entity. So I was battling with this entity, and it was like, I'm not coming out that way. And I'm like, you have to get out of my system, because I want to write another book. So get out, of me. And it was not willing. And I was like, why are you not willing? And I was grappling with it. And you know what we are talking about here. And then it wanted to come out in a very funny way. And I was like, okay, let's surrender. Mm-hmm. What funny way? And it was the black comedic way. It was the irreverent. A reviewer called it irreverent. It was the way in which even proofreading that for like the umpteenth time, I was still chuckling. And that surprised me, because I cannot be chuckling in the proofreading stage, which is a very tiring stage, and you know the lines and you're tired. And you're still suddenly chuckling because you wrote something so irreverent and so mindless. And so I don't think I've ever been so, take it all kind of in my poetry. My poetry is very different from that, and some readers have been very surprised. But yeah, I think the characters became, not just landlords and tenants, because that was the premise that my household was. I was born in a family of landlords, and so you had this land in between, and you had the tenants in the cottage, and you had this redevelopment plan that is going to become a tower, and will they get their fair share of square footage? That's the premise. And there's this Burgundy house, but this is also, like a dig at the Portuguese hangovers that my Goan families have. So you will have them call themselves dons and capos, and they think of themselves as mafias, but they actually in Hindi, gali ke gunde. Okay, but they think they are mafia, and they have this pomposity, and they're not aware of the pomposity. Now, that's not my family, but I think you stay with this overripe, and you finally caricature, you amplify and exaggerate. And so they have this pomposity, they have this Portuguese hangover, and and there's a bit of Bollywood influence, which I'll talk about later, but that's what they are, like dons and capos. And there's Don Pedro, who has a little tank, in his den, which has sharks swimming in it, but they're tiny sharks. Now, he believes they will grow big enough, and he will throw his enemies to the sharks. Okay, that's an homage to Shakal. I don't know if you know that villain Shakal, who had these big sharks in the movie Shan, where he would actually feed his enemies to those sharks. Now, in Pedro's case, the sharks never grow up. They remain baby sharks, and eventually a maid says, when there was no fish in the market that day, I fished it out and made shark amotic. Right? So I'm just having fun with this amplified ego, and this characters of different delusions. Yeah, so
thanks for sharing both. I think I'm sure it's already evident to everyone. I think the tones that the two of you take in dealing with the material that both of you are dealing with are so different. With you, like, there's a lot of humor, and the black comedy, I think that landed on me. It lands on you instantly when you start reading, wherein there's a sense of irreverence really with deaths, and it's very matter of fact that, oh, this one's died, now we have the property, and who gets to like capture the throne and tussle of power and all of those things, and that's very real everywhere. Whether culturally we talk about it or not, that's another thing. In your case, it's a lot of quietude, it's a lot of inward looking and inward, that world of the two people involved in the case, and then how they're relating to each other and the world outside. So I think maybe tell me a little bit about whether it's to do with a thought out choice in choosing that format for both of you, or is it just a preference in terms of how you look at things? How did you come to that? And maybe we'll again start with you.
Sure. So I feel like that for me is a question of structure, actually, narrative structure. And I feel that most novels, you can really trace back how they're executed through like a vision and structure. So for me, the reason why it took so long in my mind was because it wasn't an issue of voice or character. It was an issue of finding the right shape or container for the story. And like I tried so many different ways of entering the story. I tried many different perspectives. It started off as a third-person perspective for the longest time, and I moved it to first-person because I understood that this character, the main character, Genevieve, she made the most insane choices, and it was fairly important for me to set it in first so that you create that relationship with the reader where they can see around her blind spots. And so that voice, that came a little bit later, but I had to find the structure to execute the story first, and the structure I finally landed upon was the structure of justification. So for me, the novel starts so there's like a prologue, and that's in 2015, and then we go back to 1996. And in 2015, what is happening is the mother is on her deathbed, and she's saying to Genevieve, I only have 6 weeks left to live. I want to see your sister. And by this point, her sister is a superstar actress from Hollywood, and they've been estranged for years and years. And Genevieve, who's like, I guess, the less successful sister, is like, I'm not calling my sister. And the mom is like, well, like, then you might as well kill me because I have very few weeks left to see my daughters be reunited. And so then the conceit of the novel becomes how does this character convince the reader that she's not an insane person? So it becomes like this huge structure of like, how do you emotionally justify how you landed at this like insane choice? And finding that structure, I found it like in, I think, early January of 2021. So I started writing the first words of this novel in 2014, and in 2021 I found the right structure, and I finished that draft in 3 months. Finished it in April 2021. So that was crazy to me because by that point I had written like maybe like close to 200,000-300,000 words of accumulated failed drafts of trying to find the right way into the story. And all of that was just preparation into like understanding the moral landscape, the psychology of these characters in this society. And only finding the right structure was it was almost like finding the key to like creating this like ability to like thread the narrative through. And even from that point, even though that draft was written like relatively quickly, it took another 2 years to wrangle it into shape to get it to a point where I felt comfortable sending out to agents and publishers. So I guess like is that an answer to your question? Yeah.
All right. So for me, so first and foremost, again, the title was Pawwalas on Murbad Road. Okay, the earlier title. Because as I think everyone knows what a Pawwala is, right? Pav. We know, right? So it was about, of course, a community slang for Goans. And I heard a lot of that in eve teasing in Kalyan. Like, when you would ride a bike, there would always be somebody who would say, "Hey, Pawwali." It was supposed to be a kind of an eve teasing comment. So it was a comment that you're a Goan and you wear a short skirt, so you're othered. You're immediately othered. So I wanted to first call it the Pawwalas on Murbad Road because I thought, let me own the slang. Because there were these Goan Catholics living in Kalyan. Of course, nobody believed it when the script was pitched at NFDC Bazaar, because they were like, if we make this web series or movie, where are the Goan Catholics in Kalyan? Goan Catholics are in Goa. So this will be based in Goa. So they are not ready to believe any other place. Of course, I thought in my head, you give me the crows to produce it, and they can be based on Jupiter as well. Just give me the crows. Yeah. But coming to the structure of it, because I'm also a trained screenwriter for the last 7 years, I started looking at storytelling in a very different way. So when I was just a poet or I was just a short story writer, there was a different way in which I approached story. Usually I didn't outline for short stories because you can finish them in one sitting. And like you said in the morning, right, and many of the writers said in the morning, you just set out to discover where you go and you surprise yourself with the ending. Sometimes you know it, sometimes the character says, this is not me, this is me. And you go with it, you surrender. But when you come to longer pieces, you have to have some outline if you want to not get lost. Of course, getting lost is equally beautiful. But because there are too many other things happening in my life, especially doorbells and dog and daughter. So I'm like, enough is happening. Let's not get lost. Let's get found. So the screenwriting helped me understand and trajectorize what's going on the landscape, constellate the landscape. That became easy because most of my stories do have twin or dual citizenship, as I call it. They can be both. If I have enough of material, it can have the interiority of a novel. And if I have enough of dynamism, it can be cinematic. Not every story though, but I do think dual. Yeah. Like I do have, and I really like that freedom because it lets me keep, I was talking in the last session, that it lets me keep control of A to Z of this story. Now this is unadulterated me. The script could be anything else. Like a director's vision, it could be in a writer's room, it could be other writer's vision, it could be showrunner's vision, it could be market molded. I may lose, it may be something else then. Coming back to the structure is also not just the landlords living in a house called the Burgundy House. Now again, this is a Portuguese hangover. The House of Burgundy is a noble's house in Portugal. So their house is also Burgundy House, right? And they have bodyguards and they have this den and they think they are mafia, but actually they're just extortionists. They give some protection to the politicians in Ulhasnagar because Ulhasnagar is very close to Kalyan and it has a lot of counterfeit products. Ulhasnagar at one point was called the USA of India because it had all the counterfeit products. Of course, it would snap in no time, but it had its charm and you had all these misspelt words of the brands. That was Ulhasnagar for you. Very industrious people though. The Sindhis, and many of them best friends because the neighboring towns, right? We went to the same school. So here the structure is also very physical of the story because you have the landlord's house, the Burgundy house, in which there's a Mahabharat going on in terms of the characters. So you have the matriarch Rita DaCosta. She's around 67 years old, and she's actually here. Caricatured, or she's the lady in red, and she's my lady. And this is the design done by Aisha Singh, who lives in Goa. And Rita's main aim is to take back everything that is of her family that the DaCostas has stolen. Because she comes from the Anglo-Indian Joseph family, and she got married like an old Romeo-Juliet kind of but a bitter one. Yeah. And she wants everything back, and she's been waiting to take her revenge. Only it's when her husband, Don Theodore, dies that the story kickstarts. Yeah. And she wants everything back from Don Pedro, who's her elder son, who she dislikes. Yeah. And if that's not enough, she has partnered with her elder daughter-in-law, Annette, to help with this. But then because this is black comedy, because this is exaggerated, because there's so much of delusion, amplification of ego, inflation, nothing's going to happen as planned. Yeah. And that is the place where I think both the writer and the observer in me chuckle, because all the time that happens. Yeah. And that's noticing not just family, but the quirk that you notice in real life of people who are deluded, and they think, okay, I'm going to do this, and this and that, and then something else, it's like puss. Yeah. Yeah. And I just love that because I think this was the only book which was not written straight-faced. Yeah. I have been chuckling all through, and I just wish I ever write a book like that because, I was writing this in... when the Gaza genocide was at its peak, with also the plane crash in India. And so I was feeling very guilty because you cannot permit yourself to laugh in a world that's burning all the time. and it's more serious. It has lots of issues. And I was asking myself, can I really laugh? And can I permit someone else to laugh? Because we need to sober up, and we need a lot more serious stuff to do. And I realized after a few days that this is a kind of rebellion, wherein you decide to laugh when the world is crying. Because you can't, if you could help, you help, but you otherwise laugh and help yourself. And only when one of the readers came back and saying, you know what, I was very stressed with world affairs and I was reading very heavy drama, and then I read this and I was like, I could laugh a little bit. And I was like, okay, it's not me alone. Otherwise, I was almost guilty of laughing.
No, I think, humor is and joy is also resistances, as we also say, right? Because the world is relentless and will be. And I think we'll switch to talking about the tensions of greed, aspiration, ambition that both of you are dealing with. Both your books has death as a pivotal moment that changes things. And that's a very real lived experience within families, where we may want a certain structure and flow of existence, but then a birth or a death or a wedding or something like that happens, and that flips the narrative, and that's almost like a little bit of a pressure valve release, wherein you can shift the order and the system in place. So I think I'm just curious to maybe hear, even when we're writing about family, there's a certain, like you said, you had to inhabit that world, and you said that this was a story in me. So there's a sort of a possession that you almost go through with this kind of a world and that process, writing about the family. So maybe talk to us a little bit around this break of life and death in these moments, and how that coexists with ambition and intimacy as you're building it. Maybe we can start with you and then come to Jemimah.
So I think this story is between two weddings. So one wedding is where it leads into, I think, funeral and devastation. And the other wedding is when the power will shift eventually between the Goan family and the Anglo-Indian family, if at all. We don't know. And I'm not giving out spoilers. But it's between two weddings. And I think for me, death is not in Don Theodore dying, and so Rita DaCosta realizing that now I'm going to start whatever I was waiting for. I want revenge, or I want everything back. I think life and death is also in this very surprising way that I realized with her two sons, Don Pedro and Jason DaCosta. Now, Don Pedro has land, because this is also the pivotal point of greed. When you have land, especially when you come to Bombay and telescope it, you understand square footage of land. People fight for the smallest inch of space, and your tree is in my garden kind of thing. So Don Pedro wants to do everything with land that's going to capitalize and commercialize it. Like build a tower, have something corrupt, have an illegal mall underneath, have an elevator underneath, do everything corrupt. But Jason DaCosta is also using his land for business, but a different kind of business. It's a graveyard, and it's the most beautiful graveyard. So one person is perpetuating life and one person perpetuating death, and both is business. And I felt that was the interesting surprise that the characters gave me, because they wanted to use land in their way with their obsessions of life and death. Jason DaCosta loves death like I love death, not in a suicidal way.
And then I can do the from this kind of like I love that's a takeaway.
Yeah. But in a very philosophical way. Like Jason tells Inspector Gaitonde when he comes to, it's the most manicured graveyard you'll ever see. So people marvel at that graveyard, okay? And when any question is asked to Jason, he can never answer straight. It's always obsessed with death and dying and the soul going up, and even the chemicals that release from your body, okay, the CO2 and freon and all. And he says, when we are born, we are 1% dead. When we are dying, we are 1% alive. And he's as obsessed in a philosophical way. Yeah. So I find that is where I'm juxtaposing life and death.
I feel like, to be honest, the deaf conversation didn't originate as a deaf conversation for me. I feel like artistically I'm fairly interested in this concept of how we experience time. Time for me is a relatively sticky element in any form of narrative fiction or any form of like narrative nonfiction or any kind of writing. And only later in my adult life that I realized this is probably just like a function of ADHD, where I find it kind of challenging to exist in linear time. And so when wrangling a long novel, that becomes like a real issue. But it also then interestingly becomes like one of my primary subjects, which is how do you experience like understanding life as you move through it. And to me, I don't think we're meant to understand life at the pace at which it's lived right now. We live in a society, especially if we live in a society that's high pressure and extremely capitalistic. We exist in a society where it's accelerating so quickly that things from yesterday, from last week, become tinged with nostalgia in a way that I don't think is natural. And so part of the project of this novel really was like to try and understand, like I mentioned earlier, the structure of this novel is an emotional structure. It's a structure of justification. It's the structure of somebody trying to understand a life that has not been very long. The character is 27. She's a baby. And yet it almost feels like she has been trying to understand like this immense like life that she has lived. And her life, to me, hasn't even really truly begun. And the reason why it's imbued with this gravity at this point in her life is because she has hit the one thing that you really cannot like push back against, which is going backwards in time, right? So I do actually quite believe that because of the speed at which we live life right now, in this like artificially accelerated environment, the one way we can actually work to own time or to own our lives is to actually interrogate the lives in which we're living in. Because if we don't understand why we live the way we live, then we will wake up one day and our life will be over and we cannot go backwards. And so to me, that became like extremely urgent as I was working in this novel, especially at the 8 to 9 year mark. Because at that point, I'm like, it's been 8 freaking years. If I don't finish this novel, I will simply fall down and die. And so at that point, it became like all the pressures started really coming down on me to like really finish this book. But at the same time, in the last 3 years of finishing this book, I lost like 7 people in my life, and they were about my age. And to me, that was a real sobering fact, because I feel like I'm fairly young, I'm in my 30s, and I don't think people around me should be dying. It's like the thing that you think of as like far in the future. But I lost 2 friends during COVID. I lost like several friends to like things that were not COVID related. And to me, it just kind of added another layer of like this urgency of like not wanting to let time slip through my fingers anymore, and wrangling with the experience of time on the page is one way of like navigating that in my artistic life. Also because as a writer, you kind of do leave your body, you leave your time stream that we we move through chronologically, like day 1, day 2, day 3 of like January, and we go into this like sense of deep time, right, in any kind of narrative, where it almost feels like we are roaming with a bird's eye view and zooming in, and we are able to like expand the experience of 1 second, 1 minute, 1 month within a narrative form in a way that we don't have the opportunity to really do in real life. And I've started to see that as like a real advantage of working in the fictional form, because I do think that living life, we really only are able to live in a present moment. So we often like have a conversation and then we go back and we think, damn, should have like said something else. But the process of like revision is a real gift to a writer, because it's the only time you can make sure what is on the page is exactly what you mean to say. And I think like part of working through that, also because this novel took such a long time to write and revise, really ended up becoming like this sharpening block in which I refine my kind of like ongoing like struggle with time as we exist like in a time stream in like modern day. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. I think both of your processes and ways of looking at it are so wildly different and also therefore deeply engaging. I don't know how everyone's feeling. I'm having a great time listening to the two of you. But I think that nicely segues. I am aware of time. So I think maybe my last question to you all before we throw it up to the others is I think I've spoken to both of you independently in talking about how when we first think about birth and the structure of the family, the narrative that we're all fed with is love, and it is love. And you also spoke of, how far do we go to love in a world that we live in right now. So I think maybe leave us with some notes on how you look at love in your books, and where does love show up in all of the lives that your characters are living, in all of the love for fame, aspiration, family, family dignity, property, cultural title, all, like, we all love multiple things, but how are we loving each other in your stories? I think I'd love to hear that as we close. Maybe Jemimah, you could start, and then Rochelle.
So I feel like just growing up in Singapore, which is a high pressure society, growing up in like a relatively working class family where, we were economically and pragmatically really restricted. My family tried really hard not to place those mental restrictions on us, but we live realistically not in a bubble. And so there were all those pressures on us to, like, Singapore is an ambitious oriented country. Everything about us is like oriented in that direction. And so I think it was a real journey for me to like develop an opposite ambition. So I feel like over the course of working on this novel, I've developed a great ambition for love in all forms in my life, and I have kind of gravitated my life around those priorities in a way that may not make sense in any kind of like slightly more pragmatic or capitalistic structure. And so that also like ended up feeding back into like the revision process actually of like working on this book, which is I took like love and time as like my primary artistic subject and material while like working through this book. And it felt to me like it's not just about saying, like we have to focus on relationships, we have to focus on love and it's like happy ending. But to me, like what it means to really explore it is to explore the limits and boundaries of where that can actually go. Because there is like the sense of like how do we create an individual self while we're also trying to choose each other. I found myself less interested in the story. So basically some context is I wrote most of this book in Singapore, and then I moved to the United States and I did my revision there, and I also sold and published the book there. And so it felt like the two versions of myself were collaborating, right? My intensely like community-based self in Singapore, and also like the version of myself that moved to America, which is extremely individualistic and extremely like different in terms of like values. Those two versions of myself were collaborating and trying to understand how to like wrangle this book into a visible form. And so part of that I think was trying to like to answer your question on how love like comes into it, because love sounds like such a big, like, heady concept. It was just trying to understand how we can actually live with each other in society in a way that maintains individual dignity and integrity while not letting like external forces dictate our lives. So even the way we hurt or harm each other, the way we like learn to repair, those bonds were something that were pretty interesting to me and pretty like important for me to explore, and also the limits of what those things can take, because it's the way everybody enacts love is like a little different, and it's also a little reflective of the way we were raised or the circumstances which we come from. And so the different relationships in the novel are all meant to kind of like stress those bonds in different directions in different ways. And I don't mean to say that like we, with this novel, that we should, like all choose each other all the time, because at some point you do, from choosing each other all the time, develop a sort of people-pleasing mentality. Like one of the characters really does have that, where she chooses love to her great need for love creates this like shame in her, and it creates this sense of like self-abandonment. She abandons herself in the face of the potential of having love and validation from around her. So I think another thing that was like a great, like thought in my head while working on this was the idea of like how do we create and maintain a sense of self-regard while enacting like bonds and lives in society and in family. So it's not like an answer that I feel like it's not a question that I feel like I've sufficiently answered, like, because I don't think it's possible to answer it, but I think within the question of this novel, I pushed it to as far of an extreme as I could, just to see where it would go. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a broad question, but if I look at the characters, my characters in this book, they follow perhaps their obsessions. So they always love something else, and then they love a person. So that could be land, property, gold, jewelry, whatever, and then they love power. A lot of the men love the power. Like they are between the Anglo-Indians and the Goans, the men are just fighting for power, right? Whose name is going to come on that nameplate and how it's going to change all the time. So the businesses remain the same, but they change it from the DeCostas to the Josephs to the DeCostas. So that's the whole thing going on. But I think I do contemplate on different marriages in this story. Like there are different kinds of marriages, okay? And even love in the sense like there is a loveless marriage in which Don Pedro looks at Anita and thinks she's not a sex-providing wife, but she's a tea-giving wife, and she's an obedient wife, and that's the wife he expects her to be. And so that's a different kind of love. He loves the image of the wife. And I also have, a bird-brained, brawny character called Gavin, who is a Bollywood villain. Now, actually, it's based on a real life like villain, but nothing like I don't know his personal life. The rest is all made up, bullshitted up. But he works in Bollywood as a villain because he's fair-skinned and blue-eyed, and he's so outlandish in a brown country that you couldn't be a hero. So you are good to be a villain. And this is the first time I find that brownism wins. Because in a country that is sometimes fair skin obsessed, and you fight that whole, colorism, here they have this very fair villain who needs to punch the brown hero until he's bashed up eventually. And I think that's the answer to colonialism. I don't know. But he's Anglo-Indian, and what is funny is that he is, like the inside-out coconut. Like they say that, so he understands Hindi, he loves Indian ways of living, but he's white, and so they gossip about him in Hindi, thinking he doesn't know that. Now this bird-brained guy is completely in love with Annette, and no matter what she does, in the end, he doesn't have an arc. That much is the love that there is no arc for this character. He loved her in the beginning. She manipulated him eventually, and then later returns, but he still loves her the same. And sometimes I wonder whether love also incubates in simplicity, where it doesn't change. It's not changing, where you go through this trajectory of need, manipulation, redemption, reckoning, atonement, and then you come to that. So his girlfriend is doing that in this infidelous relationship, but not him. So even the marriages that I look at have the same thing. You have a couple where Fabian Furtado loves God, not his wife. But his wife also doesn't love the marriage. She would rather not have married. So you do have all kinds of marriages that are there, and you also have a marriage which is a Christian or a Catholic girl marrying a Hindu, wherein the mother-in-law or the mother says you can take back the rice bags also as dowry, which is just a very beautiful way. Because he's laughing there already, because the rice bag converts were what the Christians were called, right? I mean, who converted. So there's always this rice bag converts. So I was like, no, that's also the dowry actually. So I've actually been very irreverent, I must admit, but I have explored love and marriage and relationships through this irreverence. I try to do my best.
You have. Thank you for answering. And I totally understand that the question was really broad. But that also kind of feeds into the fact that love can't be really contained. And this is something that I am personally curious about. So thank you for both answering that. Yeah, sure.
I also think, we live part of and I'm sure this sounds like, when you were talking, I was just thinking about this. There is love that exists, that's enacted within the structures of society that we understand, where there's a value to it, right? There's almost an arc of you fall in love, there's rising action, you get married, there's economic implications that come with that. But I think it sounds to me like in the friendships or the non-romantic relationships in your novel and in much of the relationships in my own book, I think one of the things I really want to think about also is how our relationship can exist outside of that structure. Because actually friendship, to me, one version of this novel started as a novel about two female friends. It was only later that I moved it into the context of family. And part of that was also because I think that friendship is one of those things that society sees as totally like having no sense of like return of investment. Like you don't get a tax break from being like a good friend. You don't get to like, legally it doesn't do anything for you. But it is one of the most like rewarding experiences, like having that kind of love that isn't tied to like a structure that might derive some kind of reward. Like it is one of the more like enriching, nourishing things that can happen that doesn't like have that beat of like economic implication. And so that's something that actually I find to be really precious, especially now, because everything we do is optimized. Everything we do is like seen as like, how can this benefit me? How can this make me like a better like human being, or better like person, or better person fit to be in society? But actually, love, relationship, art is like patient. It like benefits from patience. It benefits from not having that sense of like, how can I be quicker, do it faster, do it better? What is better? I think it's fairly important to like question those, like even the premise of those things to me. Yeah.
Well, thanks for adding that, because even in terms of your exploration of the intimacy between the two sisters and Annette and the bodyguard's love that you're talking about, or the villains rather, what that kind is symbolic of, and maybe we can pause there for a bit and throw it to others for questions also, is like you said, that the structure probably has become porous and it can't hold love the way that it does, because the structure and systems and labels hold space for a function but not maybe for the existential human need of love. And perhaps this is a good way to also reflect about that through your wonderful, wonderful books. Thank you so much. We'll now open it up to the audience for questions, comments, reflections. Come on, I'm sure like everybody has some thought on family.
So this rice bag thing that you mentioned, this applies more to anything but Goa and Kerala. I mean, it applies more in Jharkhand and these things. I hope you haven't been misunderstood, and maybe you'll get some death threats or something like that if you no?
If I get them, I'll fictionalize them in another book. But because they don't execute those death threats. I think so. Like, otherwise, I have 2 published books, so it's okay. Yeah. But I just wanted to answer back to whatever rice bag conversions you are talking about, because Rita DaCosta just says that as irreverently that we'll give that in dowry as well. So we're giving it.
Thanks for a wonderful conversation. I want to ask a question that might be the opposite of the last one that was just asked by Shivranjana about love. So very often that desire for love, especially in families, can mask an intimacy of violence, a lot of it directed against women. And we might think of this very, most pertinently in this being the sort of like really patriarchal form of violence, but it sounds like you've got really women-centric novels, and very often women themselves can be the perpetrators of patriarchal violence. I could be completely left field, but is this something that factored into your writing process as well?
Yes, absolutely. I think if the main character, Rita DaCosta, if you look at her whole story, it starts with her completely subscribing to the patriarchy that's between the Joseph men and the DaCosta men. Okay, so she's a handmaid of that. And it's only towards the end when she realizes that no one's going to get anything. No tenant is going to get justice with the square footage. Nobody is going to get more than their pocket money, quote unquote, from Don Pedro. It's her story that she understands that why am I really just a handmaiden of the men? And she unhinges from that towards the end. So yes, there are women who are blind to patriarchy. And they don't know the ways of it, because as they say, it's quite internalized. It's very systemic. So you have to first understand where it is. Only when you identify it can you change it. But if you don't identify it, then it's so invisible. It's everywhere. Whereas Annette, the daughter-in-law, is of a new generation, and she's much more rebellious. She has plans to run away. but from patriarchy, from everything actually, from every construct and system that she is arrested in. So whether it's patriarchy or whether it's just forget ungendered domination, doesn't matter man or woman, she wants to have free will. So this is even beyond gender, beyond patriarchy as such. It's free will, it's individualistic actually, that versus collective. So surely.
So last October, I was on a panel at Mississippi Book Festival called Writing Women. And the moderator was like, wow, Jemimah, why are the men in your book so raggedy? And I was like, what the hell is raggedy? I've never heard this term before. Then like not online enough, I feel, to know this. And then she explained it to me and I was like, fascinating. So I'm not setting out to write raggedy man. But I just like, because to me, the father character, I think that's what she's referring to. The father character, like the boy that she ends up dating, like these guys, so I wasn't like interested in writing a novel where like things are skewed towards like how, like I'm not trying to teach people how to feel, right? I just want to accurately reflect like the emotional landscape of these characters. And to me, like writing those, like the sensitivities of and the dreams and like the way those dreams and emotions and feelings can be enacted within like the Asian men in the family was fairly like important to me as well, because I feel like we exist within a patriarchy, even a patriarchy that attempts to be progressive. And so again, coming back to our earlier conversation on how families like replicate the structures of society, the repressions and the like the different like biases within that society. In this family that I wrote, the women, they do experience like all things equal, everyone is trying their best, but I am really like fascinated with this literary like concept of failing upwards. All of the characters are trying their best and they're failing and they're failing and they're failing better and they're failing worse depending on different circumstances. But because we live in a society that is gendered, that is skewed based on like our external identity markers, the capacity we have to fail is a little different. The kind of forgiveness we get for making mistakes is also different. And so all of them are put under like extreme pressure, and some people survive a little better than others. And sometimes that is not down to character. Sometimes that is down to the society you live in, even with best intentions. And so for me, yeah, the women commit violence against each other, the violence of small betrayals, and those things are not attempts to like hurt each other, but they do, because we don't live in frictionless like society. Part of being with each other is to necessarily have like lives that are full of friction. It's just how can we expand our experience of love and relationships to accommodate those frictions and to have like a more expansive view of how we can live with each other. And it's for me, in my experience while writing this book, the women are more able to like bend around that, whereas the men like have a little less capacity for that. And you know, I say that with like all truly so much affection and love in my heart for every single character. Yeah. Thank you for the question.
I think so Jemimah already spoke about writing from Singapore, and on the other hand, we have writing from Bombay. So I think there's something happening with both the cities, very capitalist, doing something for the family. And we know, for example, in Bombay, that these families live their life in a very small spaces, unlike, say, places like Goa, for instance, and therefore family not necessarily factor into the way we think about families. So there's something happening there which that a city acting in a particular way on the lives of family, the family itself becomes a storyline for your book. So I don't know if you want to answer that.
Yes, but the difference is in my story, or rather even the way of thinking, is that these city-based Goans are always thinking of coming to Goa with their bloated bags, okay? So they bring all those sweetmeats, which are Bombay, halwa and Bombay duck and whatever, and they come to Goa. Then they are nourished and they're happy and they talk and they meet their family and they go back, I think, very happy, a bit tanned, and with more bloated bags of mango and all the Goan sweetmeats. So they are always coming to Goa, right? So that's this pilgrimage is very common, and they also are always going to. Because this is a Kalyan-based story, they're also going to Bombay or the Mount Mary Bandra Fete, that is very important. So I felt sometimes that at least these Goans who lived in Kalyan lived their entire lives and death between going to Goa and going to Bombay.
So Singapore is like a city-state. It's a really tiny city-state, and we're really young. So we're not like, you know, like I live in Brooklyn, so it's like Brooklyn, comma, New York, comma, America. Singapore is just Singapore, comma, Singapore, comma, Singapore. So it's like we don't have that relationship of like city and suburb in the same sense where it's like you live in a city, you go here and work, and you have this sense that like the world is bigger than that. It's not like you know, like Brooklyn and like upstate New York. Well, in Singapore, it's like Singapore versus the world. So if you want to like escape the stresses of Singapore, you leave the country. And so growing up, there was this huge sense of like we need to escape, we need to get out of here. This is a dog-eat-dog world, and you will like struggle until you die. And so thinking about that, and also like being surrounded by people who are desperate to get out of the country, desperate to try and make it outside of it, or like just like live a life where you're not just struggling to stay afloat, I think was very influential in like creating the atmosphere in the story, inviting readers into this atmosphere to understand what it's like to live in a society where people are trying, but where things always feel like it's not enough. And that also made me think about the fact that, and this is kind of reflected in the middle of the story, because I have this character who, she's totally failed in Singaporean standards. She's not able to meet the standards of excellence. And in Singapore, if you fall off the bandwagon, it's incredibly hard to get back on because the pace of achievement and moving forward is so quick. You get streamed into silos really quickly. It's really hard to like move out of it. And so in the middle of that, the internet becomes like a boom, and she sees the internet as a new gateway of being able to expand beyond the class that you're born into. Suddenly, all you need to do, you don't need like to be from a good like family, you don't need to have like the right kind of like, education, you just need an internet connection and a personality. And so these girls are like, okay, we're going to use the internet to like jump a class, and very quickly, you know, like that goes like either well or worse depending on their personalities. But at some point, this girl is like, I need to leave the country, and so she moves out of the country to New Zealand to try and get a job there, and then like geographical disaster strikes. But in that also, I was trying to capture this awareness of what it's like to be from a small nation that has been so concerned with its own survival that you don't realize where you sit on the global like scheme of things. And so when she moves, she starts to realize things like what it's like to have the advantages of coming from a country that has really geared everything about itself to make itself economically viable to the outside world. The fact that with a Singaporean passport, it's easy to get a work pass in many places. The fact that Singapore changed its time zone so that we would beat out Hong Kong as like a trading like port. We changed our like time, which is like an insane thing to do. And then the fact that Singapore, you know, like crushed so many dialects in order to make us like a more viable business hub. So all of those things, you know, like the character in her like very early 20s starts to realize those things that are not like obvious to her growing up. And she steps out of her world and moves outside of that. And so that like kind of like shift in mentality, that awareness of yourself, like not as someone from a small city state, but also as someone like as a citizen moving through the world, understanding what the pressures of like living in a world that's like moving in that way is like. It's like I'm keeping out of the time. I'm realizing that I'm lifting the like 5-minute marker. So I was like speaking faster and faster. But those things I think were like relatively important for me to explore as I developed this story. Yeah.
Any other questions?
I feel like we could do like one very quick last question, right? If someone had one.
But just to add that we do have our little Goas in Bombay, okay? One of them being near Borivali IC Colony. So when you first enter it, it's Goa or Bandra. So
Thank you so much, everyone. I will respect the tension that the organizing team is facing. I'm sure you all have a lot of questions. Unfortunately, we don't have Jemimah's book here at the festival. Logistically, something came up. Please do get a copy. The original daughter is the book. Rochelle's book is right here at the bookstalls. Please do get your copies. And they're around. I will ask you to eat their heads with more questions because I still have a lot more to say and ask, but we'll keep it one at a time. Thank you again for coming. Thank you, both of you, for writing the work that you did, and I hope you keep on writing for us. Thank you.
thank you, and thank you for such a wonderful conversation, because I enjoyed it, forgetting that I'm on the panel, and thanking the audience.
Thank you.